super busy and stretched and pressed for time. However, as leaders and founders and entrepreneurs, we still need to take the time to work on our personal development.
Yes. And that's why we have our guests on this show. We think their work warrants a second look. We also think their work can help you grow and help us grow, both professionally and personally, as previously mentioned. But before you buy the book, let's see if they can convince us if it's worth your time and investment.
This episode is brought to you by Accountability Inc., which is a global executive coaching consultancy. And they help you build a culture that is going to help take you to the next level. Now, we're thrilled, absolutely thrilled, to have a good friend of mine on the program today, John Baldoni. He is the author of the new book, Grace Under Pressure, Leading Through Times of Change and Crisis. And good gosh, don't we have a lot of that going on in the world today? Now, John is a globally recognized leadership educator, certified master corporate executive coach, and author of 16 books. I don't know how he had the time to write 16 books. I've asked him that before. But I mean, not only this new book, but he's written Grace Notes, Leading in an Upside Down World, Grace, A Leader's Guide to a Better Us, Moxie, The Secret to Build Bold and Gutsy Leadership, and on and on and on. He writes for Forbes, he writes for Harvard Business Review, Inc., and also Smart Brief. He's just a talented guy. He's also a colleague in the 100 Coaches. John, welcome.
Well, thank you for that warm-hearted introduction. It's always nice to be with friends. Cynthia, oh, and you, Rhett, too.
And he's a comedian. He's a stand-up comic.
No, viewers should know I owe a deep gratitude to Rhett because when it comes to live streaming, he brought me into the LinkedIn Live community. And for that, I am very grateful. And it's so good to be with him and with Cynthia today to talk about Grace Under Pressure, Leading Through Change and Crisis.
I love that, John. And I am so excited to have you here. Rhett introduced you and your work to me and now to our audience. So I guess I'm indebted to Rhett as well. But let's jump right in. Tell us why. Why did you write Grace Under Pressure, Leading Through Change and Crisis?
Well, I wrote it because we are in times of change and times of crisis. And grace is a topic that I believe very strongly in. This particular book is my third on the topic of grace. And how do I define grace? Well, I'm in the secular definition of it. I believe that grace is the catalyst for the greater good. So when you have a leadership lens to practice grace, it means creating connections with people. In Grace Under Pressure, I focus on grace as a muscle. So what do I mean by that? Well, there are three themes in the book of in Grace Under Pressure, and that's 1, take care of your people, 2, take care of yourself, and 3, prepare for the future. Now, what's different about this is that I'm saying you have to do these 3 things with a sense of grace. So what do I mean by that? Thinking of grace as the greater good. So through the lens of leadership, grace then becomes, yes, generosity and respect and compassion, but it's also courage, it's commitment, and it's community. And I think community is a through line for the entire book, because when you prepare your people, prepare yourself, and prepare for the future, you're really building community.
I mean, we are sort of in an unprecedented times, right? Where I think your staff and your teams and your employees, they want to be heard. They want to feel like you care. They want to feel connected to purpose. How does grace play into really what a leader must do today? And sort of draw that out for us a little bit.
Well, I'll sabotage my own book right from the beginning, and I'll say, it's not something you must do. It's something that is good to do. And what do I mean by that? Grace is not an obligation. Grace is that given to us freely. It facilitates the good within us and facilitates our better connections with us. So it's something that enables us to, put it, lack of a better term, a phrase I like to use, focus on better. So what does better mean? What does it mean to be a better leader, a better colleague, a better spouse, a better friend, a better individual in your community? All of those things. Grace facilitates that. And the other part of grace that is often overlooked is what it does for us. Grace is very much outward directed. We know it that. But at times, I should say, at least in my case, we need to show grace to ourselves. We are human beings who sometimes fail, more often than not. And so we need to cut ourselves some slack. By adopting the concept of focusing on better, there's that sense that I'm pointed in the right direction. I'm going to do my best. And I know I will take 2 steps forward and a half step back, and I'll get my bearings and I'll go forward. And that's what grace enables us to do. And that's something that you said it very importantly, that this is what individuals are looking for from their leaders. They want to know their leader is a human being. They want to know that their leader cares, is committed to the organization, and very importantly, will have their back when times get tough. And as I say in the subtitle, it's leading through change and crisis. Ideally, we're not always going to be in crisis, but really we'll always be in times of change.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's incredible for you to admit here that you make mistakes. I was under the impression that you didn't, but it's fine. No,
well, you don't have to amplify that, Cynthia. You could just let it go. I mean, why do you have to repeat it?
I feel like I'm aiding you in your leadership here. No, I really love that, because I've been under leadership and I've been in leadership positions, and sometimes it's hard to identify what it means to be taken care of or to take care of people within an organization, because you're under this. Usually it's driven from emotional place that sometimes you can't identify, right? It's this like, oh, this person should be doing this or not. So I'm curious, what exactly does it mean to take care of your people?
It's a good question. Something that happened during the lockdown and the isolation was we said we want our leaders to be empathetic. We want them to be able to feel our pain, feel our discomfort, feel our situation. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good first step. Leaders need to express empathy. And what is the expression of empathy? Well, it's compassion. Compassion is acting on that. I even turned it into a little word, if I can remember, or an acronym. Compassion is the commitment to others. It is operating for others. It is looking at others from a strong point of view. But leaders also have to have spine. So what is spine? It's strength. It's principle. It's integrity. It's nurturing, and it's energy. And this part of nurturing is taking care of others, but also when times are tough, taking care of yourself too. So leading with spine, conjunction with the sense of compassion, acting for the benefit of others, to make them feel that they belong. And again, when we talk community, and I like the idea, really what it is, it's an expression of psychological safety in the workplace. It's not that we all think or act alike, and nor should we, because that's called groupthink or group act, and that's not a positive. But the sense of belonging means I fit in here, and I feel I can express my point of view. So from a leadership standpoint, what does that mean? It means you listen. It doesn't mean that you have to do everything Rhett says, or make Cynthia your lodestone. It means you take in different points of view and make decisions for the good of all. And also distributed decision making. That encourages community. That's psychological safety too. So.
One of the things that intrigues me about the book and about the topic of grace overall is I wonder, is this something that, is this a learned behavior or a taught behavior or something that can be coached for a leader to get better at? Because I know a lot of times we get so wrapped up in our day to day, we get so wrapped up in our busyness, right? That this seems to me is something that's sometimes not natural for some leaders. Is this something you can learn or you can do taught?
Very definitely. And I do, and I understand what you're saying exactly. I will say it's totally natural and within us. But what happens, Rhett, is just because of the circumstance that you just said, it becomes sublimated. Why does it become sublimated? Because we're busy. But the other thing is that for many of us, we don't want to overcommit. We don't want to show our feelings too much. And so when we say the concept of grace, we feel, well, that's a little touchy-feely, which it is. But really, and this is why I wanted to talk about grace under pressure, because when in times of change, in times of crisis, this is when grace comes to the fore. You bring people together. You point them in the right direction. You lead them. And we have a wonderful example of this right now in Ukraine with President Zelensky. He's united his country, often is referred to as Churchillian in his actions, of course. But what he's done is he's mobilized the people by giving them a voice too, and he becomes part of their spokesperson, speaking on their behalf. But there is a sense of grace about the struggle that they're doing because they're fighting oppression. Now, the sense of grace in the workplace is allow yourself to get in touch with what? Your sense of vulnerability. Okay. And for many of us, that's hard because they go, well, if I show myself as weak, people aren't going to follow me. Well, yeah, if you're weak, weakness is not vulnerability. Vulnerability is that sense of humility. And you know that when we are humble and we admit our limitations, people say, oh, okay, you're a real human being. Curiously, Julia Borstein, who has a wonderful book out called When Women Lead. And I interviewed her on my show, and she said one of the findings at the moments of isolation during our pandemic, women leaders came to the fore and in some ways were more effective as leaders. How and why? Because they were not afraid to ask for help and be vulnerable. And being vulnerable meaning they are not afraid to express themselves and say, I don't have all the answers, but seek counsel within the organization, but also outside of it. And for some men, male leaders perhaps found themselves a little discomfited by that. Why? Because if I do that, well, then people are going to think that I don't know all the answers. Well, yeah, but if you do have all the answers, that's not good either. So.
It's interesting how just some people lead really well in crisis. Some people lead really well on day to day. Some people lead really well as middle managers. Some people lead well over organizations. And this idea of leadership kind of transforms. And I'm guessing that's why you've written now 16 books. So I'm curious how this book connects to all of your previous books. And do we have to read them in order, or can we start here?
You are really stimulating book sales. I love it, Cynthia. No, each book is a standalone. And this is my third book on grace, and you can read, if you're going to read one book, I'll say read this book. The previous book to this was called Grace Notes, which was a series of reflections, sometimes in poetic form, about what we were experiencing and how leaders need to demonstrate resilience, empathy, compassion, things like that. And the first book was Grace, A Leader's Guide to a Better Us, which was very specific about how to act from a spirit of generosity, how to be respectful, how to show compassion, and then how to act for the benefit of others and energize the organization. This book is, again, it's about, tempered by our times, of course, is what do I do with this grace, especially now? And interesting, I come up with this idea before the idea of our purpose. I have written about the topic of purpose on multiple times, and at least one or two books on it. And I think it was Simon Sinek, among others, who said purpose is our why. So from that, purpose is what stimulates our vision, which is our becoming, leads to our mission, which is our building, our doing. And the third part is our belonging. What do we call the belonging? Our values. That's where grace comes in. And here's where you get into this, and Rhett and I have had this discussion before. You can be very successful in your vision, in your mission, what the heck, in spite of people. And we know companies who do that regularly. But how much better is it when you bring them along and you create community? That's your value proposition. That's where grace enters the picture. People want to be at work, to use a term which you don't hear as often anymore, but engagement. They are engaged, and both psychologically, emotionally engaged, physically engaged, and mentally engaged. And who doesn't want to work in an organization where people are pulling together because they want to be there and they're working for a goal, a vision, and a mission greater than themselves? So
I have to get in the weeds for a second. I know that look. Because I want people to really understand the difference here. Because sometimes when we talk about grace and we talk about this, we talk about vulnerability, some people think, well, does that mean empathy? So what is the difference between sort of being empathetic and vulnerable and grace? Can you get
sure.
granular?
Well, sure. I would say, unscientifically, empathy is the feeling, the ability to feel another's discomfort, their pain. Okay, vulnerability is revealing your own self, which might be your own pain, your own discomfort. So one is vulnerability is internal, empathy is external, directed outward. And then grace becomes a facilitator for, if you will, how to act on that feeling, how to show your vulnerability, how to show empathy, which I believe is how to be compassionate. So,
okay. Yeah, thank you. Because I just want people to understand that the difference there, because I think there's a big difference.
Yeah.
It's a value. It's an insight. It's an important distinction, Rhett. So thank you for bringing that up. So, and
you said before that compassion is the action. Compassion is the movement, the motion. It's the thing that propels everything forward. I'm curious how. And also talking about this idea of energizing an organization. So as a leader, how do we come in and I guess mobilize compassion and within the community we've created without being the only one that is sort of representing compassion?
Well, there are things you can buy on Amazon called compassion buttons, and you pass those out. I mean, if it's not there now, it'll be there when this episode comes out. I think, Cynthia, that's a very valid and good question. I think that it comes from an internal desire to be compassionate, to be caring, to be committed to the welfare of others. Okay. And we all do it in different ways. And I think the leader is the one who sets the example on that. That said, leaders can often learn from people who are doing the right things. And so there are many people in an organization who are compassionate types. Pay attention to those leaders. What can you do to emulate them? But from an overall standpoint, we want our leadership to be, our senior people to be compassionate. And some will be and some won't be. But I mean, I don't want to I'm passionate about compassion, from which the word comes, of course. But it's it's basically thinking about others. And from a leadership standpoint, it's thinking about putting people in positions where they can succeed. And gosh darn it, that's really good business too. Surprise, surprise. So,
do you think this makes people rethink and have to rethink if you're going to approach leadership in this way? Does it make people have to rethink their corporate values and maybe, if you're trying to lead this way and you're trying to get a management team to understand this as a way that we're going to move forward as an organization and as a characteristic or part of our culture, does it beg the question of, do companies really have to reevaluate who they are and their value system and their values, their stated values? Most companies have stated values, but grace is not usually in a stated value.
No, and it's not, and it should be, but it's something that has to be accepted by each individual. It's not something that you mandate. It's something that you show. And when people show grace to one another, that makes it, I think, in a way, can think of it as contagious. And so that's one of those things we want to spread around. And so,
I want to push back on that, though, John, because if you don't state it, does it happen?
Yeah, I think well, yes and no. It's behaviors within the organization demonstrate what the organization really is. It doesn't matter what your value statement is. It's the actions and behaviors of individuals. So it doesn't hurt to put it in there, but sometimes that word might scare people off. It may give it a religious connotation, which is fine, but that's not where we are in a secular world, nor should we be, because any organization should be open to people of all beliefs or no beliefs. So,
I don't want to put you on the spot or really get a free coaching session out of this, but I'm going to ask a question. So let's say your organization is not representing what you want it to be. How do you get over that frustration and enter a place of compassion and motivate? Because if it's happening in multiple areas, most likely it's starting at the top, right? And I guess that self-reflection is the part I'm curious about.
Well, there's the old saying, it might come from the Buddha or Dalai Lama, but be the change you want to see. And that's where grace is. So you can't go up to the boss and say, you need to act with grace. You first show the way that you act with grace. And you be the exemplar of what it means to be kind and considerate to others. There's another part of grace, getting back to the muscle theme that I was saying, grace is also facilitates resilience. And we all need that. And so we've been kind of veering a little bit when I push the idea of compassion on the, quote, softer side. But there's an edge to grace. And that's that sense that I can come back and I will be transformed. That's another part of resilience that Eileen Darg, who's a seminal thinker in this area of resilience, has taught me, is you don't just get knocked down, but you come back, you bounce back up, and you're transformed because the situation has changed. At least you are transformed because you've learned something. And grace facilitates resilience because it's that inner strength within us that we have the capacity to show the way to others, and ideally they will adopt it too. So the idea, this is where the concept of grace becoming, it's not just the soft, squishy stuff, but it's also the strength that we have. And I like to tell, when I speak to organizations today, to think about where they were in January 2020 and where they are now, and how much stronger in many ways they are now. And because the situation that we've been through from the pandemic and all of the changes and upheavals that we've experienced. And aren't we better off internally many times for that inner strength that we discovered within ourselves? And from a standpoint of grace, that's something we can share. So.
Well, John, I was going to ask you to make your closing argument and your closing your closing takeaways and why people need to buy the book. But I think you just kind of did that. But yeah, give us give us a closing argument. Why do leaders need this book? If you're a manager, leader, owner, entrepreneur, if you're in that space, why do you need this book?
Because when you act with grace, you're creating a place where people want to come and work and do their best. You can call it community, you can call it great teamwork, but people feel that they belong and they want to contribute. Grace facilitates that from the leadership standpoint, but also from individual to individual. Grace feeds upon itself. And when we act with kindness toward others, when we show resilience in the forms of when adversity strikes, we demonstrate what it takes to act with grace.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna second that closing argument, just because I feel really positive about this book. For those of you who think we're no longer under pressure, I'm feeling more pressure now than I did at January of 2020. I'll be quite honest with you, and I think that now is the perfect time for this book, because now is when we least expect the pressure to be on, because we've gone through this trauma, but we don't realize everyone has got a little bit of PTSD or whatever, too much change at once, and I'll be picking up the book, so I hope that's validating it all. I can't wait.
Right. No, I agree. And every crisis is different, right? I mean, I think the pandemic was a different crisis than this recession that some say we're in or going into. And so I think this is a book that, as Cynthia was talking about, I think can really guide you through whatever that crisis is, right? It's not a specific crisis. We're always under threat. If we're in business, we're either in threat by competition, by external factors, by other things. And so we've got to think about leadership in a different way. I think this is it.
And we're not in this alone. And that's why grace is so important, because it's that facilitation of connectedness that enables us to work more effectively together.
Grace under pressure, leading to change and crisis. Go pick it up. Where can people find you, John?
Well, there's my website, johnbaldoni.com. Amazing. And then this book is available wherever fine books are stolen. Wherever fine books are stolen. Yes. How was that for an advert there? Of course, it's on Amazon, but it's also in Barnes and Noble, as well as Books A Million, and it's all over. The distributor is Simon & Schuster, so it's everywhere. So.
And guaranteed to be a bestseller. So, and hopefully we help that out a little bit. Thank you for spending some time with us today. I'm Rhett Power.
I'm Cynthia Johnson. And we'll be back next week with another best-selling author who can help us really grow both